Steve Moran here with Senior Housing Forum, and I'm really excited to do this call. When I look at the senior living industry, I mostly see folks who are closer to my age than further from my age, and I've written about that. And I'm talking to Jay Addis. You're a millennial, right?
That's right.
And so let's start by talking about where you are in the senior living industry, what you do. You have a community, right?
That's right. I own a community with my wife called Serenity Senior Living. It's in Pflugerville, Texas, just outside of Austin. And the unique thing about us is really that it's a residential community. And we were looking to get into the senior space together several years ago, and the more research we did, the more signs were pointing to the benefits related to residential, and how a lot of communities, and when I say communities, towns, don't really have that many of those as an offer, or people don't know about them. So we became passionate about the whole residential side of senior housing.
And so how big is your community?
The one in Pflugerville is licensed for 11, and then we have 2 other communities that are under development. We're in Texas. Texas will allow you to have up to 16. So those will both be 16-bed properties.
And one resident to a room, and what kind of rates and those kinds of things?
It depends on the property, but we took over an existing property and was our first one. So kind of like any house, your rates are going to reflect the neighborhood and the local area. Those rates are between $3,500 and $4,500, depending on the room type and level of care. And the newer properties that are purpose-built are going to still very much feel like a home. That we do not want to get away from that, but it will be a little more contemporary. Everything will be, newer. So those rates will be between 4 and 5.
And dementia care, or
our third property will specialize in dementia care, but as you know, we all deal with it and should be trained on it at every level of assisted.
Yeah, for sure.
But our third property will be specifically licensed memory care.
So one of the questions that people always have with small buildings like this is, how can you afford to staff them? And how many people do you, so what kind of maybe we ought to start by saying, what kind of a staffing ratio and sort of what level of care do your residents need? Which is together with that. So
yeah, it's a great question, and that's really what we discovered. I won't say the name, but my wife is a physical therapist, and she works a lot of time. She works per diem with several of the big assisted living properties throughout Austin. And there's a lot of benefits to that, a lot of benefits to the bigger facilities and the amenities. But when the level of care reaches a certain level, really, and an assistance really does become standard versus an add-on, the smaller community is a much better fit, because our caregiver to resident ratio, as compared to a large facility might be 20, could be good. At night, it could be more than that. Ours is going to be 5 to 1, 6 to 1. So because, your original question is, how can you afford to staff it? Because we're smaller and we don't have all of the overhead, all of our cost really goes into the basic needs, which is food, safety, and labor. So we don't have a lot of the other inefficient things.
So do you have trouble finding staff?
You know what I found, and this was a bit of a surprise, because a lot of people said, you're going to have trouble finding staff, and you're going to have trouble finding residents. And this is sort of why I loved your article, was if you build a great place for your customers, which are our residents, you build a great place to work too. And so and that's where I commented that we focused almost exclusively on culture, and a culture that feels like family. And we treat our team members like that as well. and they in turn treat our residents like that. And so our retention rate is well above normal, and our turnover is very low.
So, one of the things so a couple of questions. I'm really intrigued by this model. If you've been reading for a while, you'd actually know that my mom spent the last 8 months of her life in a 6-bed community, similar to what you're doing, and it was a great experience. And the guy who owns it, interestingly enough, is a guy who's probably about your age and is sort of looking at doing the same kind of thing. There are two questions that sort of keep rattling through my head that I don't feel like I have a good handle on. Is the first is, how many of these can you actually do? And before the management of it just becomes overwhelming. And let me give you both of them, and then I actually have a third one beyond that. And then the second one is, is it possible, do you think, to somehow carve out a place in a larger enterprise assisted living and do a similar staffing model?
Yeah, interesting. That's definitely an interesting question. Going to your first question, it's really all about the team. And so we had our first property for a while. We really focused on our culture and our systems. We were doing a lot of the work ourselves, my wife and I. And then as we began to grow and stabilize and the marketing was working, we would bring on 1 or 2 key team members at a time. Now that we have 3 that are sort of in different stages of between operating and development, I've partnered with a builder that does custom building homes that was a member, kind of a member of my inner circle community from the real estate days. And it's really all about adding that person or people in order to be able to grow. And so rather than start with the behemoth of this big project, like a big assisted living property has to get a ton of financing and everything, we sort of are doing it organically. And as we grow, we're adding those key components.
So you're sort of thinking in terms of you'll just keep growing until you maybe can't grow anymore or something.
Yeah, until it either doesn't make. Yeah, I guess there's really no limit. The limit is probably more the speed, because we're not necessarily just trying to scale, to be some behemoth operating company.
Right.
We're very much focused on doing it organically and keeping the product tight because we're proud of it. But with that said, each year we sort of have 1, 2, 3 projects that we have that in areas that we want to go around Austin to continue to grow.
So at least for the time being, Austin is your focus?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So, and do you think there's a way to transplant this model to a big enterprise senior living?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I guess they do it somewhat with memory care. They'll have the facilities separated by locked doors and, all that good stuff. And they'll have more staffing in the memory care unit maybe. But it would be interesting to see. So much of what we focus on is this does not feel like an apartment building or a long hallway or, some private room way off down this hallway. So to get away from that, I'm not sure. Probably could be done maybe on a larger campus where that would be an option. But everything I've seen in working with and through, and I'm not trying to talk bad about the large assisted living places. They certainly have a role, but they manage so much towards that P&L, where it's all about efficiency and economies of scale and all these words, which in the senior care space translates into less people taking care of our loved ones,
Yeah. It's a fascinating question to me, because when I looked at it from my mom's perspective, it would have required her to essentially have one-on-one care, which would have then taken her care. I think we were paying, $5,500 or $6,000 for a month for her care, all inclusive, to probably $20,000, because it would have been still $5,000 or so for the community, and then probably needing to hire essentially one-on-one staffing at 24 hours or close to it. So it's a fascinating question to me. What about marketing? How do you, because you obviously at that size, you can't have this huge marketing budget, right?
I would love that.
I'm sure you would.
People often ask me, what do you do for marketing? And I kind of just point to myself.
Yep.
So yeah, it is a challenge, and it's a lot of boots on the ground, but I don't have 150 beds I need to worry about at any given time or more. I have between 11 and 32 that are up and coming. So my marketing's much more precise, and now that we've stabilized and we're really proud of our product, we focus a lot on marketing too, and just getting out to the community. The biggest thing that I've noticed probably is that, and you're as well familiar, I'm sure, is that people just don't know this is an option.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are you mostly talking to people in the community, or folks at the hospital, or referral sources, or?
Yes.
Okay.
That goes to the whole precision thing. So definitely notice that there's a series of gatekeepers, whether it's going to be the social workers, the network groups, the doctor groups, the senior networking groups. So working our way to get familiar with them, and really talking through when an option like ours would be appropriate. And I've really taken on an abundance mentality too. And as I go out into the community, even though I could potentially consider the one or two or three other, of these homes my competition, I find that if I educate everyone on that this is an option, there's several of them, here's what they look like, it's better for all of us.
Are you finding that you're getting referrals from more enterprise senior living communities as well?
What's that? I'm sorry.
Are you finding that you're getting referrals or people moving from larger enterprise level senior living communities to yours?
We are seeing that happen. We're not getting a lot of referrals at this point because, as you know, occupancy and the assisted living, especially with the larger communities, is a bit of a concern. It's done a bit of a dip. So even the independent livings that would generally be a referral source for us are really trying to hold on to those. But we are seeing a lot come from those type of places.
Gotcha. And so, I mean, maybe it's a little different for you. So where my mom was and the way the California regulations are is he's chosen to stay at 6 beds. It's still easier up to 15, but there are some regulations, sprinklers and those kinds of things once you go past 6. And one of the things that I look at, to me, that for him is the most challenging is that you can have these huge swings in occupancy. So the week my mom passed away, he already had 1 vacant bed, and another resident passed away that same week. And so he went from 80% occupied to 50% occupied in 3 days without, really being able to sort of plan for that. Is that a struggle or a challenge for you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. In talking to other communities as well, and I'm nodding my head because we've felt that too. And if you're in a big facility and you have 150 beds and let's just say a big number 10, go away, well, that affects your occupancy percentage still by maybe, not even 10%.
That's right.
But we lose 1 and we go down 10%, so, and 6, it's even more so. So, that's where, I consult to some people that are opening these as a first time, and I say, you just never let your foot off the marketing pedal. I'm sure the big places feel the same way, but because we have a smaller number and we can get full quicker, that waiting list, having people, ready to move in, it's super important.
Yeah, because the flip side of that is moving 1 person in increases your occupancy by 10%, and it doesn't for a large building. And so there's sort of the reverse side of that as well.
No question.
So I want to actually explore your being a millennial and deciding to do this. And I guess sort of my first question that I wonder about is, as a millennial, as you go out and talk to other millennials and you say, oh yeah, I run an assisted living building. Do they look at you weird, or do they go cool, or do they think you're crazy, or what?
You know, that's an excellent question. I think most of them know our reason why and why it's been residential. So I guess it's fair to say maybe they're prepped a little bit on us, and so it makes sense to them. But yeah, there's definitely a few that are just like, what are you doing with assisted living? Like, what is this all about? But one of the things I commonly say is, if you haven't dealt with this on a personal level, even if you're millennial or even younger than a millennial generation, you will. And our goal is to make you dealing with that situation as smooth and painless as possible, because there's a lot that happens, as you well know, being a family member, going through that, so many unknowns, uncertainties. Am I making the right decision? Guilt. And the better we do, the more it makes sense as a business, and the more we can help.
So, yeah, as you know, one of the big challenges that we have as an industry is, there are two challenges. One, of course, as you know, because you're a reader, what I write, I think, is largely a myth, but there's sort of a sense that millennials are just tough to deal with. And I don't know, it's sort of hard for me to know how to even address that issue, because I just think it's foolish thinking. I think in many respects, I have more of a millennial heart than I have a boomer heart, which sort of makes it easier. But I guess the question I think that you might be able to sort of help, our audience with is, how do you make a compelling case to millennials for working in the industry? Obviously, it's compelling to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, your article was really awesome, because you sort of identified some of the traditional millennial traits and how they translate into perfect fits for the senior housing, which is, millennials want to have a purpose. They don't, they want to walk into whatever job they have and feel like they're making a contribution. My dad would be like, you do your job, you keep your mouth shut, you're making a contribution, And I said, yeah, but I want more than that. I want to feel good about it. So I think when they see all the effects and how important their work is in the senior industry, I also think, maybe it's right, or maybe it needs to be used in the correct way. But whether or not millennials are stubborn, or whatever that word is to use for them, but when they know that there's that purpose-driven meaning behind what they're doing, I find that they're very kind of open-minded, results-driven, less about how much more money am I going to get paid today for this, and more about, man, this feels really good to be doing this and working together as a team. And I found you mentioned the boomers. I don't know if we're just lucky or what, but a lot of I work with a ton of boomers. My manager is a boomer, and we're all results oriented, and we all love what we're doing. And so I don't see that clear line of us not agreeing on principles or anything.
Well, and it's really funny, because I'm sitting here thinking with you in Austin. I have a young friend of mine who I've known since he was a teenager, and he's a relatively old millennial. He would be right at the earliest stages of them. And I was having some chat conversation with him last week. And what was funny about it is that he was kind of like, well, I'm just living my life and having a good time and hanging out, and that's all I really want. And so it was much more of a much more of a boomer. I don't really care about purpose. I just want to sit around and drink beer with my friends kind of thing. It just makes me laugh, because he's the guy who should be like me, and I'm the guy who should be like him, but we're really different. And so I think the point you make is, it's really so individual, right?
It's definitely individual. Yeah, it's not one size fits all. I'm sure there's some generalities with both of our generations, but
Yeah.
but once you really find something you enjoy doing, you become passionate about it, you become curious about it, then that's when things start to happen. People start being attracted to it. They want to help join.
Well, and fascinating to me is that when you actually look at the research data, we actually know that even with the silent generation and the boomers, that purpose is a very important thing to longevity. And so I think, I find myself wondering a lot of times how much of this stuff is just sort of manufactured, and that ultimately it comes down to the individual relationships. And if people love coming to work every day, the generation isn't so important.
Yeah, it's interesting looking back, because I was a young millennial back when they first started using the term, because I'm what I call a grandpa millennial. I'm like on the very end of the millennial generation. But I was in the military, and so I heard all of these quote unquote designations about millennial behavior, and I'm surrounded myself in the Marine Corps with a group of people that's really focused, and didn't meet any of that. And I was just like, I mean, is this just another one of those, these young kids? And
right.
Does that happen every 20 years?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, I do think there's actually a fair amount of that, right? And one of the things that there's a lot of conversation about right now is that we baby boomers are going to want a senior living product that's vastly different than what's being offered today.
Yes.
And maybe that's true, but I'm not sure when we get 85 that we're going to mostly be concerned about our health and our safety and being taken care of. And I'm not sure that in reality, even that's going to be as different as we think it's going to, or the conventional wisdom is on that. So we'll have to see.
Well, it's a really good point, Steve, and I'm kind of excited to see how it plays out, because there's no doubt baby boomers are going to have different taste in the independent living and even some of the big assisted living, their idea of amenities. But like you said, our focus is really that when you need the care, and when life really slows down for you, and the good, warm human touch means everything in the world. It's almost like the reverse Maslow hierarchy of needs. It's like you go up, you go up, you go up, and eventually you start working your way back down, where you just want that love, affection, and acceptance, and a little bit of help.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when I look at where my mom was when she passed away, and I think about what it might be like for, my last 6 or 8 months, and it's hard for me to imagine being in a big enterprise community as opposed to that, because it was a house, and my stepfather would go visit her every day, and they had Coke because that's what he liked to drink, and when I'd go visit, they'd bring me a cup of coffee, and they knew that I liked it with 2 cream, and it's just really hard to do that in a big enterprise place. And
for sure,
I bring the dog in, and one day my mom decided, she had some cognitive deficits, and she decided the dog shouldn't be there. And I said, well, Mom, I'm going to have to leave. And the caregiver came in and said, oh no, I'll take the dog, and then took the dog off into the kitchen, and I stayed and visited with my mom. And then next time I was there, the dog was fine. So, and those are just really hard things to do in a big enterprise. And so, there's this sense that we have this, we've got this big age bubble coming, and it's going to solve all these occupancy problems. Right. But I kind of find myself thinking that we're going to see more people doing what you're going to do, and that big bubble we're expecting is going to be just a tiny little blip, because there are going to be other alternatives. So we'll have to see. But I think you're doing something amazing.
Well, that means a lot to me, Steve, especially coming from somebody who's so ingrained in the community like that. And it's one of the most eye-opening things I would say that has happened to my wife and I. Obviously we're very involved in this type of, community now, but I find myself explaining it all the time. And no matter what age, millennial, boomer, somebody older, when you say there's this residential option, we're licensed by the state, we meet all the same requirements, we have a sprinkler, we have, we've got all of that covered, but we're in a family home-like environment. We hang out together, we sit together. I know all of the family members. They're just like, well, that's the way it should be done. I said, I know.
Yeah, I sort of have this picture of maybe building a village of these things like that, where you get some scale on a single property, but that really each household work independently. But you can get some scale on some management and marketing, and maybe on some prep kinds of things. So I'm really excited for what you're doing. I have one more question about, you don't mind me asking, is how old are you?
36.
Okay, great. Yeah, I should have asked that early on.
No, that's okay.
I think it provides some framing on it. So, and this is your full-time job, and your wife's not quite full-time job.
That's right. I mean, it feels full-time to both of us. But yeah, I'm in it full-time, and she's there supporting me along the way.
Right. And do you live in the 11 bed one, or no?
No, we're about 20 minutes, no more than 20 minutes from any one of our locations.
Gotcha.
And you mentioned real quick, potentially like a cluster type of idea, or I would love to do that. I mean, I am looking for a little bit of land where, these are needed, to where you could lay out 3 to 5, and you could even, I do see a major benefit in someone coming into an independent living environment and doing the whole CCRC.
Yep.
And just not having to move, 10, 15 minutes away. But I think you could do that again on the residential level and have it make sense for both sides.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting you talk about the CCRC model, because it would seem like to me that this model would be the easiest place for sort of an enterprise level senior living community to try it, would be in a CCRC model, as to build a small house like that. And clearly in the nursing home side, clearly some of that's been done, but I don't know if anybody's really ever done that on sort of either an independent living or an assisted living fashion. I assume after we put this article out that somebody will come in along, if they've done it, come along and say, oh yeah, we're doing that. And
we're doing that. I do have a very good friend who is doing 180 bed development, all residential, and he's going from assisted to memory care. Independent assisted memory care. He's doing the whole, and he's not developing it all at once, obviously, but it will be laid out in segments. So I'm excited for him doing that.
Cool. Well, I'd love to hear about that as well as it progresses. Well, cool. Jake, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, and I appreciate you reaching out, because this is how I get some of my best stories. So I love what you're doing.
Well, likewise, keep doing what you're doing. I love reading your articles, and I love your perspective. So thanks for all that you do for us in the senior community.
You're very welcome. You have a great rest of your week.
You too. Thanks.